This video is for you if you want to understand the 5 essential keys to understanding shadow work. Nelson Mandela, quoting Marianne Williamson in his acceptance speech, "Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be?" So, what is the shadow? The shadow is neither good nor bad. It is that part of the non-conscious that works through the subconscious and manifests as limiting beliefs, addictive behaviors, and character flaws. Our shadow is all those things about us that we want to hide, that we want to push down, that we want to push away from us, that we don't want to admit are there. Those things that come up to us, that are constant plaguing thoughts. The shadow is our stored traumas and emotional wounds. And these wounds and traumas can be very debilitating. And we sometimes want to push them away. You know, one girl gets raped by 10 guys and says, "You're not going to take this away from me." One girl gets inappropriately touched by her uncle and it shatters her for life. That's how the shadow works. Now, it's not that they both didn't suffer something. They both did suffer something. But their approach to it and their perspective of it and the strength, their shadow, their light. And the brighter the light, the deeper the shadow is cast. So the more light you bring to a subject, the more it's going to come up, especially such as addictions or past traumas or different things that we do, behaviors, actions. Now, the shadow informs us of parts of our psyche that need healing. Our childhood traumas are often the basis of our limiting beliefs. For the most part, in families and culture and schools and religions and politics and television and media, all of these things are teaching us that we aren't enough. You need this to make you enough, this to make you enough. The side effects may be this, but this will make you feel enough. All the signage that is everywhere is tapping straight into your shadow. It is tapping through your subconscious into your non-conscious and pulling those things up and saying, "Hey, you see this? This right here. This is going to satisfy you. Not only is it going to satisfy you, but it's going to make you enough. If you look like this, if you act like this, if you talk like this, if you don't give any F's, if you be this particular way." And that's coming off of that not enoughness that we often pick up in our limiting beliefs of childhood. Also, what childhood traumas have happened where our parents or school teachers or siblings or whoever didn't pay us the proper attention or paid us the absolute wrong attention. And how did that make us feel in the moment? That stuck into our nervous system, that stuck into our psyche, that stuck into our non-conscious. What is it about that? So, all emotional traumas cause pain, and that pain can manifest emotionally, which is, of course, where it's coming from, but something we can notice emotionally, or even more so as physical pain, because those pains, those traumas, those hidden things get stored in our nervous system. It gets stored in our body. And so that storage place has to be opened up and the emotion unattached to that happening, so that happening is just part of the story. Some events from past lives can hide in the shadow. You know, how were you killed in a past life? If you believe in past lives, I do. You don't have to, but you know, whatever. So things from past lives can be there. Some of my trauma with females had to do with a past life where I was a little boy at a well, and they wouldn't let me drink from it because I was an orphan. I believe I was somewhere in France. I don't know for sure, but I know there was a carriage that came into town, and I had to sneak over to the well just to get a drink. That hid in my psyche for how many lifetimes? I don't know. but I know that it was there. It may be something that my shadow is coming up with just to tell me of something that's going on. And maybe past lives don't exist at all, but part of me believes that is from a past life, so I can recognize that, hey, this is something I need to address. Our own fear, anger, hate, shame, blame, and guilt for our own actions hide here. Things we have done, such as when I used to be a shoplifter, such as when I was a hurt person that hurt people, such as when I coerced people into doing things they didn't necessarily want to do, or I was drunk and they were drunk and I coerced them into doing things they didn't want to do, or where I was coerced by other people. Those things are hiding down there. All that shame, blame, and guilt. Hey, look what I did. Now the blackout drunks, there are a few times that I have been doing shadow work where something from a blackout drunk has come up, but most of the time, no. Most of the time, no. And a lot of actions, when you're drunk to a certain point, are coming out of that non-conscious state, coming up through the subconscious. You have no conscious to filter it out. This brain that we're working with right here doesn't filter it out. So now then, it's here. How many times have you seen somebody have a couple of drinks of a certain thing, it triggers something in their brain, and now then they're ready to fight, or they're whoopee woo, or hey, I'm going to kill myself, or, you know, they're the life of the party, which is who I used to be. I was quite the entertainer, apparently. Still am, but consciously. The shadow isn't our enemy. The shadow is just a repository of things. Think of yin-yang. Yang doesn't exist without yin, and yin doesn't exist without yang. They're constantly molding and shaping each other. And when they're working in balance and harmony, this is great. This is an awesome thing. Such as, I believe it's a Cherokee statement of the white wolf and the black wolf that lives inside of us, and which one is stronger, the one you feed more. Well, what if you overfeed the white one more? That's going to make the black one shrink to the point where it's going to start to get angry. And if you starve it off altogether, what happens then? There may not be a survival mechanism that is potent enough to help you survive. That's why we have a term in the business called, or in the field of clinical therapy, that's called healthy narcissism. And when I was first doing this work, I was barely there. I had to work to get back to a certain form of healthy narcissism for self-preservation, because I was so happy and full of love and light to be let go of all this stuff. I was giving whatever to whoever, whenever, if they needed it, especially for me personally. Oh, you need help? And then I was like, hold on, I need to start limiting this. One, I need to start limiting who it's going to, why it's going there, and how much is going. So it's a story similar to the browser history of our life, our actions and our decisions. So, you know, if you go to your browser history, you can, and you don't clean it. I do clean mine just simply because it eats up RAM. But if you go to your browser history and you don't clean it up, yeah, you can go back and find stuff you were there 10 years ago, and you wonder why the internet's running slow or your computer's running slow. It's because you haven't cleaned out all that stuff. Some of those cookies from some of those sites are still sitting there. Well, that's the way the shadow is in our non-conscious. All those little cookies are sitting there. All those little addresses are sitting there, and some of them don't go anywhere. Some of them are, the address is gone. That site is gone. That thing is gone. We've dealt with it in some way, and now it's gone. But some of them are still there. The ones that you visit the most have the most attachment to them. And the shadow is where our love and compassion for ourselves must start or be planted in order for us to awaken and ascend. This awakening we're going through, if we're going to ascend, we have to go there and plant the seeds. We have to go to the shadow. We have to talk to it. We have to start communicating with it. We have to start letting those emotions come up so that they can be let go of, so the shadow is still there. The shadow should always still be there. We need that balance. People talk about ego death. I'm not so sure about ego death, because ego is our survival mechanism. It's a step above the id, which is absolute animal-based nature. You know, the ant. survival nature. Ego has a little bit more of that of I must survive. It's often sitting right behind our superego, which is the mask we put out to the rest of the world, but it still needs to be there in order for us to survive in this world, especially in this day and time where we're constantly dealing with other people. Now, the shadow can be viewed as our inner child who is begging for our attention. This is where the inner child's hiding. This is the dark bedroom with the lights out and the electricity's gone out and the child is crying and wants mommy or daddy, whoever you are. You've got to learn to self-parent. That's an interesting concept and will be discussed in a later video, but self-parenting is important to this child. You must go to this child. You must find this child. You must love it. You must accept it with all its flaws. As I said in a recent video, you don't abandon a 2-year-old. You go to that 2-year-old, you find out what's going on with that 2-year-old, and you take care of it, or most people do. Not everybody does, and this is where traumas come in. So if you're with me this far, and I thank you for being so, like it, share, subscribe, comment. Thank you so much for doing so, because those comments help me understand what you need to see, what you want to see, what you want to learn about. But for our awakening, which is to come awake as spiritual beings, that's just not enough. We also have to ascend, and that means doing the shadow work to move our traumas up to our consciousness and let go of certain things so that they're not holding us down on the Hawkins scale. It's like, even though I know that there's sadness there, if I'm not doing anything to alleviate that sadness, I'm not gaining. I'm not moving up to that scale of resonance. The shadow is where we find our true power. The shadow is where we often find our greatest strengths. By diving into the shadow, we find those unhealed parts of ourselves that want our love. And this is just asking part of us to accept another part of us, to accept those things. I accept that I hurt people. I don't like that I hurt people, but I still accept that I did. The shadow is where we find our true power. By diving into the shadow, we find those unhealed parts of ourselves that want our love. It's just that simple. Those ruminating thoughts and things like that have a basis in an unhealed child. And that child wants our love. It has a sick belly. It has a hurting heart. It has a headache. It wants something to eat. It wants you to sing to it. That child, that inner child, is a part of us. And by bringing that child into our acceptance that it's there, and bringing that child into our awareness, and then additionally teaching that child, you are enough. I love you, which is the I enough. I love myself. I see you. I accept you. I hear you. I'm listening. That's the most difficult part, is listening, because sometimes it doesn't speak with a voice. It doesn't have the words to tell us. So how, when it doesn't have the words to tell us, what do? Well, there are many different ways of doing that. This video will cover some of those. By accepting and loving those parts, we integrate them and are able to move forward. But we have to know the details. And we can move forward. We can integrate them. That's the whole point of shadow work integration. That's the whole point of my shadow work integration method, is to be able to go to things that are sitting right on top, that's bothering us the most, and listen to it, allow it to come up and allow it to come out and be seen and heard and let go of. And then all that energy is changed, it's transformed, it's transmuted. Energy can't be made or destroyed, it can only be transferred or transformed. Even in a nuclear explosion, you're not making new energy, you're releasing it. But the same amount of energy is still in the universe. And believe me, if you don't do your shadow work, it's gonna explode. As Dr. Caroline Leaf says, it's like a volcano. It may seal over for a time, but it'll come back again and again and again. Well, if you hold it down long enough and well enough, it's gonna go off like a nuclear bomb. By integrating our shadow aspects, we have a greater awareness of what others may be experiencing and what's going on with others, and therefore we can have that room to step back. We can have that room to say, okay, I see your inner child needs a deity change. It's not my job to do it, and I'm not accepting responsibility for it, but I cannot take this personally and let you have your little whatever, and it's okay for you to have your little whatever, and it's okay for me to have my whatever and go my way. By never taking things personally, part of that is some deep shadow work, where we can have compassion, because you never know what the other person's going through, even if they're telling you at this conscious level. That's why talk therapy doesn't work as well as people think, because we're talking out it at this level, and we're experiencing it at this level, where it's at this level, the heart. By accepting our shadow work, we find it easier to accept others' faults, which I just covered, but let's go into that in a little bit more detail, where the others' faults are things in us that we're seeing. Anything you don't like in someone else is something that you don't like about yourself. Think about that. We're all mirrors for each other. Anything you don't like about someone else is something you don't like about yourself. That's why when you point those fingers and those others are pointing back at you, that exists in you. And you're holding it down, and you don't want to see it. And believe me, I argue with this one all the time. I've told you about me and myself arguing. I got to get in there. You know what? It happens to me all the time. So it's not like anyone is perfect at it. The Dalai Lama is better, but I remember that the Dalai Lama said that even he has bad days. Everybody has days where they're not on top of their game. So when I'm going through a really rough patch and I'm ready to bite somebody's throat out and spit it in their face, or the full moon's coming and I'm ready to eat babies and pick my teeth with their bones, I have to say, you know what? Instead of feeling guilty about this, I'm going to remember, even the Dalai Lama has a bad day. Even Yeshua, or Jesus, had a bad day. He beat a bunch of people up with a rope. It was more than a rope. It's about that big around and big knot tied in it, and he went off on them. So, shadow work helps us learn to never take things personally and to forgive ourselves and others when we do. When we start taking things personally, which I just mentioned a minute ago, when we start taking things personally, that's when things start going bad. That's when things become something we're owning. The problem with the world today is you all blah, blah, blah. The problem with you is you don't blah. The problem with you is blah, blah. The problem with you is you're not satisfying my want for what I want you to do that will supposedly make me happy. And sometimes there are times when that inner 2-year-old cannot be made happy. There's just no way to do it. So you go in and you love that inner 2-year-old, and you bring that inner 2-year-old to the surface, and you love that inner 2-year-old. You listen to that inner 2-year-old till that inner 2-year-old is exhausted. And on those days when that's happening, you know, I used to sing when I was addicted to coffee, and the caffeine ain't working anymore. Well, you know what? There's times when it don't. So, you know, whatever your substance is, if that's not working, give yourself a break. We can integrate our shadow using many different methods. They will assist us in integrating the shadow in many different ways. Shamanism primarily uses altered states of consciousness through the use of substances, often referred to as medicines, and some of these can have very dangerous, even deadly side effects if used improperly. In fact, Jimson weed, which is something that can be used for these purposes, it was so prohibited amongst the American Indians that only specific people were allowed to use it, because the difference between the dose that gets you to the point where you need to be and the dose that kills you is 1 micrograin, and that depends on your height, weight, body fat, mental psyche, and all kinds of things. So it's only someone trained in talking with the spirit of that plant would know how to properly use it. And I've known people that did. And subsequently, it altered them in painful ways. Some forms of mysticism use meditation. Yoga is a primary example. The Essenes that Jesus was a part of, or Yeshua was a part of, were mystics. You've got the Gnostics. You've got Kabbalah, or Kabbalah, as it's pronounced. There are many different types of mysticism. The Toltecs in South America are part of this. And this is more of a meditative, introspective look. This is more of going within. This is more, in fact, Shirley MacLaine wrote a book after going to Peru, I believe it was Peru, called Going Within. And that was one of my first experiences of understanding what I was doing, because I didn't know I was going within and doing meditation, which I had done sporadically throughout all my life since a child. And she explained it, and I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing. Okay. So I've been meditating off and on as a child, but I've only been meditating specifically on a daily basis since 2019. So 5 years now. And this doesn't make me any better than anybody else. This just makes me someone who meditates, you know. So some forms of magic or spell work are designed to lift curses and generational curses and sins, expel demons or devils, and you know, you could even call some of the prayers that are done for this purpose to be spells. A lot of these require a lot of incantation. A lot of these require different physical somatic expressions. A lot of them require different ingredients and things. But they can be done that way. And sometimes those demons and devils that are being expelled are specifically the shadow. Sometimes they are extraversial, energetic entities. I'm not denying those exist. I had some myself. Some places in spirituality will call them negative attachment. Some places in mental health will call them aberration and try to medicate them, and they don't go away. They just sit there and say, look, now I can really get you to do stuff because we've knocked the top off your consciousness. And now then the subconscious is going to say, hey, let's play. Ecstatic dance and physical movement are excellent ways to release stored somatic nervous system traumas. I've done this. I have danced around fires using shamanic methods and chemistry. And not all of shamanism is chemistry. I know that. A lot of my shamanism was done without it. So I know this before anybody comments. But a lot of shamanism is based on using chemistry. A lot of shamanism is based on using chemistry. Plant medicines, specifically ayahuasca, that's chemistry. But it's also not necessary. Now, there are places you can get to with it a lot quicker, and I'm not condemning anybody who does. But are you prepared to get there that fast? Sometimes going light speed from here to there is not as well as moving at this pace. But the ecstatic dance and trance, I mean, think of the, what do they call them, dervishes who spin and spin and spin and spin and spin and spin and spin. Think about when you were a kid and you were spinning on the tire swing, or you would do the little spinning in place thing and get all dizzy and fall down. Well, people do that specifically to get to an altered state of consciousness, and it works. Headbanging, like with heavy metal, works. Trance dancing works. The dance Hawk of the Flame is where Hawk comes from. And you give me a good fire and a good drummer and I will dance all night. Yes, sir. I love it. So mindfulness or self-awareness, observation of ourselves, is a great tool for observing triggers and for observing the body-mind response reaction cycle. And the reaction cycle versus the conscious choice or response cycle. Once you get to a certain point, the reaction should be a response. It should move to that point where I'm looking, and instead of seeing, there's that happening, I'm going to go do this, it's, there's that happening, do I need to be involved? Oh, I need to be involved? Do I need to have, what action do I need to take? Okay, now that I've taken action, do I need to involve emotion in this? And these are all happening at micro, quick decisions still, but you can do it consciously What emotion do I involve? Oh, I don't need to involve emotion. Okay, oftentimes a really solid person, especially men, will shut down, and I'm one of them who, in an emergency situation, I shut down, I become Spock. I'm calm, I'm cool, I'm collected, I'm supportive, everything's going on, I'm talking at this level, let's do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're all remaining calm, and we're all breathing. And I've been accused of being unfeeling. Well, the thing about it is, in that moment in time, all those feelings and all those questions of why, and all those feelings, and that gets in the way of what is practically needed to be done. So by working through these things, and mindfulness is a good way to do it, and mindfulness and meditation are different. Mindfulness is used in meditation to observe thoughts coming to us during meditation, but meditation is specifically going within and turning off the body and eventually the mind. But I'm not worried about being a monk, and I'm sure you're not either. But that response cycle versus the reaction cycle is important, because reaction is a built-in situation. If this happens, I do this. If this happens, I do this. And that comes from a trigger situation that we often are dealing with. Journaling, creating artwork, writing music, writing and telling stories are great personal expressions for shadow integration and trauma release, especially when it has to do with music. I know I've done all the different types of artworks, and music is one of the greatest expressions, simply because music tunes the soul, that energy, frequency, and vibration thing. And by letting those feelings out through that song, through those lyrics, we find an amazing release. That's why you find, and specifically, I'm a member of Ananda Marga, and we do kirtan, which is something that is a very large movement for about the last 500 years in India, which is Baba Nam Kevalam, and dancing, ecstatic dancing before meditation, sometimes just ecstatic dancing, and singing the kirtan, Baba Nam Kevalam, over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. That chanting, that music moves us into a specific resonant state. So using music to express our shadow is an incredible way to do this. Also, I found that writing stories helps a lot. Just simply writing a character doing the things and dealing with the things that I'm dealing with, and how would they deal with them, is an amazing way to release. Now, we can also use breath work, mirror work, evolved or positive affirmations, because you can't affirm negative things. You know, people think affirmations are all positive. No, I will tell you this. Oh, I've got a horrible memory. You are affirming, you are making firm that you've got a horrible memory. Oh, that's my this or that or the other, which is some physical symptom. Yeah, you are affirming, you are making firm that that's yours. So these affirmations help us reinforce our desired outcome, because as we learned in earlier videos, the mind learns by repetition, over and over and over again. Now, part of my mind isn't learning by repetition. I'm like, why can't you learn this? I'm doing this, I'm repeating it, I'm repeating it, I'm repeating it, I'm repeating it. Why isn't this working all the time? Well, here's a little secret. Emotions aren't good or bad. They're just things that happen. If you stay stuck in one, that is not a good thing. That is not a good thing. So since you've stuck around this long, I'm going to give you my bonus tip. The shadow can be your best friend or your worst enemy. Now, if you haven't realized that through this video so far, here's how. Ignoring the shadow always ends in pain and sadness. Plain and simple. It always ends in pain and sadness. The shadow can keep us stuck in addictive behaviors. Oh yes, it can. Even the physical addiction, once it's gone, there's the emotional addiction that can be still there. Me with tobacco use, off and on and off and on and off and on and off and on and off and on. And the shadow can keep us in a rut. The shadow can keep us stuck. It can keep us doing the same thing over and over and over again, like that tire stuck in the mud. And it seems like we can't get off the hamster wheel. Seems like we're getting nowhere. 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. That type of thing. Because we're constantly exhibiting and experiencing and expressing that shadow in a negative way, because we're not paying attention to where it's coming from or what's going on. Now, once seen, heard, and felt, the shadow exhibits a self-love, self-acceptance, and self-compassion that overflows onto everyone in our lives. We are not responsible for how they accept our love. But I know from my experience of healing deep wounds and traumas with my father that the very next day he felt free to talk to me about things. I know of healing wounds with my sons that they felt free to come to me with things. I know of healing wounds with my sisters and they came to me with things. They came to me. Now, this doesn't mean that everybody in my family accepts me. I am the black sheep. Believe me, if anybody needs help with anything, I'm the first one they're going to call and say, hey, I really got this heavy duty situation. Will you help me? And they know I will be there. If no one else will be there, 4 o'clock in the morning, pouring down rain, and all I got's a bicycle, all right, I'm on the way. They know that. But otherwise, they don't want to be around me because I'm Scorpio and I'm telling the truth. And not just the truth that I'm perceiving. I'm like, you're acting like a jerk. You're acting like a jerk. And y'all are treating me like a jerk and each other like jerks. Why don't you quit? And when I was younger, I would even call out the adults about the situation. Now they're all pretty much gone. And nobody liked that. But they all knew if they needed help, all they had to do was call. And that's still in effect. The shadow can give us strength to face some of our darkest experiences, whether internal or external. The darker it is, the easier it is to walk into it because you can see it standing there. It's no longer hiding. The more light you bring, the easier it is to walk into it. Now, this doesn't mean that the shadow goes away. This means that the shadow becomes integrated and that yin and yang are working together. So where it's not yin and yang, it's yin yang. The shadow will never go away. If you make your shadow go completely away, what contrast are you going to have in this experience to be able to call yourself a human on this planet? If the shadow goes away, you're no longer the same as you are. Now, I'm not saying that certain people don't get to a certain enlightened state where they no longer are having to deal with the shadow. Hey, that's awesome. But if you push your shadow away and it's no longer there, you're losing a lot of your strength. You're no longer living in balance. And the way I see those great masters is not that they didn't have a shadow. It's that they lived in balance with it. And they knew how to use it compassionately. They knew how to let it show them how to love others and themselves in such ways that, as Sri Sri Anandamurti said of Yeshua, or Jesus, the most compassionate being ever to incarnate on this planet. That's an incredible statement from a man who forgave his wife for putting him in prison. Okay, they tried to starve him to death. He drank yogurt water for 5 or 7 years or something. I don't remember the exact story. So, the shadow shows us the areas where we need self-improvement. And sometimes this self-improvement isn't just knowing how to do our jobs better or knowing this or that better or even knowing how to do shadow work better. Most of it's usually knowing how to love ourselves and others better, how to accept things about ourselves and others better, how to be more integrated in this world. Also, the shadow can be our greatest friend by offering mutual understanding and compassion. There are times when the shadow is going to say, hey, I understand. Remember when we did such and such? I understand why you're feeling bad. The shadow can comfort you. Mine does sometimes. From even down in that deep, dark place where our fear and stuff resides, says, hey, remember when this happened? And this is how we got through it? That's the shadow talking to you. Remember when this happened to us? Remember when this person did that? Remember when this person did that? Remember how we survived this? Remember how we walked through this part of our life? That's the shadow working through you in a positive way, saying, hey, remember this really extremely dark time? And this is how we got through it. That we did get through it. I'm going to tell you now, doing shadow work, be very, very, very full of care. Be very full of care. Full of acceptance, but full of care. Because you can dive into the deep end, and I have, and without guidance, it can be detrimental. If you dive in with no guidance, and you don't have any idea what you're doing, you just say, hey, I'm going to find out what's going on. That can be very bad. That's when I went deeper into alcohol. That's when I went deeper into marijuana. That's when I went deeper into pornography. That's when I went deeper into sex. That's when I went deeper into the deepers. Instead of deeper into the shadow, finding it and bringing it to the surface, I went deeper into the shadow, found it, and stayed under the surface. So thank you. Like, share, subscribe, comment. Thank you for doing your shadow work. I appreciate it. Remember, I am enough, you're enough. I love me, you love you, I love you, you love me. I am enough, I love myself. 9,999 times a day. I am enough and I love myself. That's all it takes. Heck, even one time a day. Wake up, I am enough, I love myself. So there you go. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing. Watch this video over here or this one. Thank you, and namaskar.